People think a property line is just ink on paper. They don't realize it's the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. The steel gate began to move at exactly 6:14 that morning with a slow hydraulic groan that echoed across the valley like a church bell announcing judgment. Cool mountain air carried the smell of wet cedar and fresh-cut grass, while the heavy hinges rolled forward one deliberate inch at a time. On the other side, brake lights stretched farther than I could count. SUVs, pickup trucks, delivery vans, school carpools, landscaping trailers. 60 homes worth of people suddenly realizing their quiet suburban routine depended on something they had never questioned before. The only road leading in or out. My road. Meredith Voss slammed the palm of her hand against the hood of a county sheriff's cruiser hard enough to make the sound bounce off the nearby hills. Her perfectly pressed cream blazer looked untouched by the panic spreading across her face, but her voice had lost every ounce of confidence I remembered from our first meeting. "You can't do this," she shouted. "You're trapping innocent families." I never raised my voice. I simply unfolded the court order, felt the thick paper between my fingers, and nodded toward the freshly installed survey stakes lining both sides of the gravel entrance. "Nobody is trapped," I said. "They're free to leave. They're just not free to cross my ranch anymore." The deputy standing beside me quietly compared the coordinates on the order with the orange survey markers hammered into the ground only hours earlier. He looked up once, met my eyes, then stepped back without saying a word. That silence carried more weight than any argument Meredith could make. Behind her, confused homeowners stepped out of their vehicles. Some held coffee mugs. Others still wore running shoes or business suits. Children pressed their faces against back seat windows, wondering why the morning traffic hadn't moved in nearly 10 minutes. The smell of fresh asphalt drifted from somewhere inside the subdivision, mixing with gasoline and damp earth until the entire entrance carried the strange scent of a place built too quickly on land that had never agreed to change. Meredith pointed directly at me like she was presenting the villain in her own courtroom drama. "He lost this case," she yelled toward the gathering crowd. "He's trying to punish all of you because he couldn't accept reality." I almost smiled. 3 days earlier, I had been the one standing alone while cameras photographed me walking into the county courthouse. Newspapers called me an angry rancher trying to destroy a thriving community. The local evening news interviewed Meredith beside a decorative stone monument proudly displaying the words Silver Ridge Preserve. She had spoken calmly about neighborhood safety, responsible development, and protecting hard-working homeowners from one stubborn landowner. Most people believed every word. They never asked why the entrance monument sat several hundred feet inside property that wasn't owned by the neighborhood. They never wondered why the official subdivision map carefully labeled every street, except the one they were all standing on. They never questioned why every deed referenced access without ever identifying who actually owned it. Then another vehicle rolled quietly to the front of the line. It wasn't a resident. It was a black SUV with the logo of the construction lender printed discreetly on the passenger door. 2 men stepped out carrying leather portfolios instead of toolboxes. They weren't interested in the traffic. They weren't looking at the gate. Their attention went straight to Meredith, whose expression changed the moment she recognized them. For the first time since I had returned home, the woman who acted like she owned an entire valley suddenly looked like someone searching for an exit that no longer existed. 6 weeks earlier, I wasn't standing behind a steel gate holding a court order. 6 weeks earlier, I was driving home expecting to see cattle grazing beneath the eastern ridge, where my father taught me everything worth knowing about land, promises, and the simple truth that ownership isn't measured by what you build. It's measured by what you can prove. 6 weeks earlier, the only thing I expected to find waiting for me was silence. After 14 straight months supervising bridge rehabilitation projects outside Fairbanks, Alaska, the idea of hearing nothing but wind across Caldwell Ranch sounded better than any vacation money could buy. My old diesel truck rolled through familiar back roads, its tires humming over cracked county pavement, while the early October air carried that unmistakable smell of pine, dry hay, and cool stone that had always meant home. My grandfather used to say you could identify our ranch with your eyes closed because the breeze always carried cedar before sunrise and fresh grass before sunset. I smiled when I crossed the old cattle guard at the western fence, already thinking about repairing the barn roof before winter arrived. Then something felt wrong. It started with a sound. Not birds. Not cattle. Not tractors. The distant, steady hum of residential air conditioning units running together. A noise that had never belonged anywhere near our eastern pasture. Then came another smell that instantly replaced the cedar I had been waiting for. Fresh asphalt. Still warm enough to release that sharp chemical scent people usually associate with brand new parking lots. I eased off the accelerator without realizing it and rolled down the window farther. Somewhere beyond the trees, I heard lawn sprinklers clicking back and forth in perfect rhythm. My stomach tightened before I even reached the ridge. My father always called that overlooked the front porch of the ranch, because from there you could see almost every acre our family had cared for since 1911. He stood with me there when I was 10 years old and pointed across the valley with rough hands stained by grease from repairing farm equipment. He told me never to judge land by how useful it looked today, because one day somebody else would see value where everyone else saw empty space. I did not fully understand what he meant back then. I understood the second my truck reached the top of that hill. My hands tightened around the steering wheel until my knuckles turned pale. Where cattle once grazed beneath scattered oak trees, rows of identical gray rooftops reflected the morning sun. Streets curved neatly through what used to be open pasture. Decorative sidewalks wrapped around flower beds. A community pool shimmered behind a wrought iron fence. Children rode bicycles past houses that had never existed the last time I stood there. At the entrance, mounted between stacked limestone columns, stood a polished sign that read Silver Ridge Preserve. Below it, another banner announced Phase 2 coming soon. My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. Years of construction work had taught me that panic makes people miss details. I drove closer. Every mailbox matched. Every driveway had fresh concrete. Every streetlight still carried manufacturer stickers waiting to be peeled away. Then I noticed something that hit harder than every new house combined. Mounted beside the neighborhood clubhouse as nothing more than rustic decoration hung my father's old ranch gate. Someone had sanded away decades of weathered cedar, covered it with glossy white paint, and bolted it flat against a stone wall. The carved words Caldwell Ranch had almost disappeared beneath the new finish, but I could still recognize the letters my father cut by hand with a woodworking chisel the summer I turned 13. I stepped out of the truck, rested my fingertips against the smooth paint, and could almost feel the original grooves hidden underneath. That gate had welcomed 4 generations of my family home. Now it had become somebody else's decoration. I knew right then this was never going to be just another property dispute. Somebody had erased a family's history and expected nobody to notice. My hand was still resting on my father's old gate when I heard the quiet electric hum of a luxury sport utility vehicle pulling onto the circular driveway behind me. Gravel crunched beneath expensive tires before the engine shut off, with almost theatrical precision. I turned slowly and watched a woman step out wearing polished riding boots that had clearly never touched mud, oversized sunglasses despite the mild morning light, and a cream-colored jacket with a Silver Ridge Preserve board badge clipped neatly to the lapel. She walked with the confidence of someone who had spent years believing every conversation would end exactly the way she planned. "Can I help you?" she asked with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. I nodded toward the gate mounted on the clubhouse wall. "Actually, I was wondering why my family's front gate is hanging on your building." Her smile barely changed. This decorative piece came with the property acquisition. I looked directly at her. "My name is Ethan Caldwell." The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat before she recovered. "Meredith Voss," she replied, extending one hand without hesitation. "President of the Homeowners Association." I did not shake it. The cool morning breeze carried the smell of fresh mulch from newly planted flower beds, while automatic sprinklers hissed softly across perfectly trimmed lawns. Children laughed somewhere behind the clubhouse, completely unaware that the ground beneath their bicycles had once been cattle pasture. Meredith lowered her hand, as if nothing unusual had happened. "If you are here about sentimental family memories, I completely understand. Change is difficult for some people." I glanced across the neighborhood. "I am here because this ranch has belonged to my family for more than a century." She opened a leather portfolio and removed several neatly organized documents. Every page sat inside plastic sleeves with colored tabs marking different sections. She handed me the top survey map like she had performed this presentation many times before. The eastern parcel was legally transferred years ago through Ridgecrest Holdings. The development received county approval, environmental clearance, and final occupancy certification. Her tone remained perfectly calm. Everything was completed according to the law. I studied the map without saying a word. Lot numbers covered the neighborhood. Utility easements appeared in red. Drainage corridors in blue. Every house carried a parcel identification number. Then my eyes stopped at the entrance road. It was shaded green like the surrounding landscaping, but carried no parcel number, no ownership label, and no county designation. Meredith must have mistaken my silence for surrender. Your family left this land and used for years, she continued. Communities grow. Counties evolve. Empty fields become neighborhoods. That is progress. I folded the map carefully instead of arguing. Years spent reviewing construction plans had taught me something simple. Drawings almost never lie intentionally, but people often reveal far more than they realize when they prepare them. Meredith gestured toward two private security officers standing near the clubhouse entrance. Since you are not a resident, I am going to ask that you leave community property. I looked from the security officers back to the white painted ranch gate fastened against the stone wall. Community property? I repeated quietly. That is correct. She smiled again. If you return without authorization, we may have to document trespassing. The words hung in the cool air while birds settled onto the clubhouse roof above us. I simply took one photograph of the mounted gate, another of the entrance monument, and one more of the subdivision map still resting on the hood of her vehicle. Meredith watched with obvious amusement. Planning to call a lawyer? She asked. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. No, I answered. I am planning to start by asking better questions. As I walked back toward my truck, I looked one last time at that green entrance road on the map. Every street inside the subdivision had an owner. Every utility line had a record. Every drainage ditch had a file number. Only one strip of land had been left strangely anonymous, and experience had taught me that missing details are rarely accidents. The certified envelope arrived 48 hours later, waiting inside the old black mailbox my father had installed with his own hands nearly 30 years earlier. The thick cream paper felt expensive, the kind designed to impress people before they ever reached the first sentence. I stood beside the porch, listening to wind brush through dry pasture grass, while the familiar scent of machine oil drifted from the workshop behind me. My name appeared beneath bold legal lettering, followed by words that almost made me laugh from their sheer audacity. Silver Ridge Preserve Homeowners Association was suing me for interference with business operations. Intentional disruption of residential access, harassment of homeowners, and public statements that allegedly damaged property values. According to the complaint, I had created emotional distress simply by questioning ownership of land my family had held for generations. I read every page twice before folding them neatly and placing them back into the envelope. Angry people react. Careful people investigate. That afternoon, I drove into the county seat and met with the first real estate attorney available. His office overlooked the courthouse square, where American flags snapped sharply in the autumn breeze. Framed certificates covered every wall, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with old law books filled the room. He listened without interrupting while I explained everything from the painted ranch gate to the missing parcel number on the entrance road. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and slowly removed his glasses. On paper, he said carefully, they have recorded deeds, approved permits, completed inspections, and occupied homes. Challenging all of that could take years. Years. That single word echoed louder than anything else he said. By the time I returned home, local news stations had already picked up the story. Meredith appeared on television standing beside the neighborhood entrance monument, speaking with calm confidence about protecting families from unnecessary conflict. She never mentioned my family's history. She never mentioned the missing gate. She never mentioned that she had threatened to remove me from my own land. Instead, she smiled into every camera and described me as a disappointed former landowner unwilling to accept progress. The next morning, another surprise waited for me. A temporary court hearing had been scheduled unusually fast. Meredith's legal team requested an immediate order preventing me from interfering with neighborhood operations while the ownership dispute continued. The hearing itself lasted less than an hour. Their attorneys presented polished binders filled with permits, aerial photographs, engineering approvals, and closing documents for dozens of home sales. Every page appeared organized. Every answer sounded prepared. My attorney objected repeatedly, arguing that ownership questions remained unresolved. But the judge emphasized that the immediate issue involved preventing disruption while the larger dispute continued through proper legal channels. By the end of the hearing, the temporary order prohibited me from obstructing neighborhood access or interfering with ongoing residential activity until additional evidence could be reviewed. Meredith walked out of the courtroom surrounded by reporters. She thanked the county for supporting responsible development and protecting hardworking homeowners. As she passed me on the courthouse steps, she paused just long enough to offer a courteous smile that somehow felt colder than the October wind. "Sometimes," she said softly, "it is healthier to let the past stay in the past." Later that evening, a delivery driver stopped at the ranch carrying an expensive bottle of red wine with a handwritten note tucked beneath the ribbon. The message contained only one sentence: "Here is to finally accepting progress." I placed the unopened bottle on a shelf inside my father's workshop beside rusted surveying tools and faded property maps. Something about the gesture bothered me more than the lawsuit itself. Truly confident people rarely celebrate before the final decision. They celebrate because they know something others do not. Standing there among the smell of old cedar and worn steel, I looked again at the subdivision map I had photographed on my phone. Every colorful line still appeared exactly as before. Every parcel remained labeled. Every utility corridor had an owner, except for one narrow strip leading straight through my ranch that still carried no identification at all. Meredith believed she had already won. I had the uncomfortable feeling that neither of us was looking at the real case yet. For the next several days, I stopped thinking like a frustrated ranch owner and started thinking like the construction engineer I had been for most of my adult life. Projects leave fingerprints. Every permit, every survey, every deed, every inspection creates a paper trail. Somewhere inside that trail, somebody had taken a shortcut. Every morning I drove into the county records office just after it opened. The building smelled like aging paper, floor polish, and stale coffee that had probably been sitting on the warmer since sunrise. Clerks gradually stopped asking why I kept returning. They simply nodded and wheeled another cart of archived property files toward my desk. I compared maps from different decades, tracing old boundary lines with my finger until the tips of my hands carried faint gray dust from countless photocopies. By the fourth day, I finally found the transaction that supposedly transferred the eastern acreage out of my family. The seller's signature belonged to my father, Walter Caldwell. At first glance, it looked authentic. The shape of the letters matched. The long underline beneath his last name appeared identical. Even the witness page looked professionally prepared. But something refused to sit right with me. My father never signed legal documents using blue gel ink. He hated gel pens because they smeared across engineering drawings. He always carried the same black ballpoint pen in the front pocket of his work shirt. It sounded like a meaningless detail, but the memory stayed with me because he complained about those pens almost every week. I requested additional records connected to the sale. Ridgecrest Holdings appeared almost out of nowhere, purchased the land, transferred it to the developer a few months later, then dissolved before the end of the year. The registered office listed on the incorporation papers was nothing more than a rented mailbox in another county. The notary who supposedly verified my father's signature had retired years ago and passed away shortly afterward. Every answer seemed to disappear the moment I reached for it. My attorney reviewed everything with a tired expression. "Suspicious is not the same thing as illegal," he reminded me. "We need evidence that survives a courtroom." I understood exactly what he meant, and it frustrated me because he was right. Meanwhile, construction inside Silver Ridge never slowed down. More landscaping crews arrived. Decorative fencing appeared around the recreation area. A large billboard near the entrance announced that another group of premium homes would soon be released for sale. It was obvious they were moving quickly, almost as if someone wanted to finish everything before difficult questions could catch up with them. One afternoon, I parked on a public overlook across the valley and watched moving trucks pulling into houses that had once overlooked my family's grazing fields. A little boy climbed out of the back seat carrying a baseball glove while his father unloaded bicycles from a trailer. They smiled, laughed, and waved at neighbors introducing themselves for the first time. Looking at them, I realized something important. Those families were not my enemies. Most of them probably believed every document they had signed. They trusted builders, lenders, inspectors, and title companies to do their jobs honestly. If I ever found the truth, it had to protect innocent homeowners while exposing the people who created this mess. As the afternoon sun settled lower over the eastern ridge, I unfolded the subdivision map once again across the hood of my truck. My eyes drifted back to the same unanswered question. Every house carried ownership records. Every utility easement had legal descriptions. Yet the entrance road remained strangely undefined, floating through every document without belonging to anyone at all. The longer I stared at that blank strip, the more convinced I became that whoever prepared these records had not forgotten it. They had intentionally avoided identifying it, and people only hide details when those details have the power to change everything. The breakthrough arrived where I least expected to find it, not inside the courthouse, not in a law office, and not buried inside another stack of county records. It was waiting beneath 20 years of dust inside my father's workshop. I had gone there looking for an old surveying tripod because I wanted to compare the original fence line with modern satellite images. The familiar smell of cedar shavings, motor oil, and weathered leather filled the building the moment I pushed open the heavy sliding door. Nothing inside had changed since the day my father passed away. His workbench still held coffee rings burned into the wood. His tape measure still hung from the same nail beside the vise. Even the old metal lathe sat exactly where he had left it. While searching beneath the machine for the tripod case, my flashlight reflected off something that did not belong. A narrow steel compartment had been welded beneath the workbench, nearly invisible unless you were lying on the floor. I pulled the small latch, and the hidden drawer slid open with a dry metallic scrape. Inside rested a weathered metal document box wrapped in wax canvas. My father had always believed that important papers deserved better protection than filing cabinets. The box contained yellowed engineering drawings, rolled surveys, handwritten notes, and one sealed envelope with my name written across the front in his unmistakable handwriting. My hands hesitated before opening it. The paper carried the faint scent of old cedar and machine grease, almost as if it had absorbed the workshop itself over the years. His letter was short. He wrote that land could be stolen on paper if the wrong people gained enough influence, but access was different. He explained that decades earlier developers had already approached him with offers to purchase the Eastern Ridge. Instead of selling everything together, he deliberately separated the entrance road into its own independent parcel under the Caldwell Ranch Trust. Then came one sentence I read 3 times before it truly settled into my mind. Whoever owns the road owns the future. Beneath the letter rested the original survey completed in 1989. Unlike every modern map I had seen, this one clearly identified the entrance road with its own parcel number and legal description. Attached behind it was an easement agreement granting limited access to a neighboring cattle operation that no longer existed. The language was precise. The access could never be transferred to residential development, commercial expansion, or multiple subdivided lots without written approval from the Caldwell Ranch Trust. If those conditions changed, the easement automatically expired. I spread every document across the workbench beneath the old hanging light, while evening sunlight filtered through dusty windows. Suddenly dozens of unanswered questions began fitting together like pieces of the same puzzle. Ridgecrest Holdings may have claimed ownership of the pasture, but nowhere in the transfer documents had they legally acquired the entrance road itself. That explained the missing parcel number on Meredith's subdivision map. They could describe the road. They could pave it. They could even landscape around it. But they could not honestly identify an owner because the owner had never changed. I drove straight back to the county records office the following morning carrying copies of the original survey. A senior records supervisor spent nearly an hour comparing parcel descriptions before quietly turning his monitor toward me. There it was. The entrance road still appeared under the Caldwell Ranch Trust exactly as my father had described decades earlier. No transfer, no sale, no amended easement, no release. The property record had remained untouched the entire time. I thanked him, walked outside into the crisp autumn air, and stood beside my truck listening to leaves rustle across the courthouse lawn. For weeks, I believed the battle centered on proving who owned the houses. Now I understood something much more important. The neighborhood had never possessed a legal right to the only entrance connecting it to the outside world, and Meredith had built her confidence upon a foundation she apparently never bothered to verify. I could have closed the road that same afternoon. Every frustrated part of me wanted to. Instead, I drove back to the ranch, unlocked my father's workshop, and set the original survey beside the unopened bottle of wine Meredith had sent after the first hearing. My father had spent his entire life teaching me that timing matters just as much as being right. A bridge does not fail because of one heavy truck. It fails because somebody ignores small warnings until the weight becomes impossible to carry. If Meredith had built her entire development on assumptions, then I wanted every one of those assumptions documented before they collapsed. The following week became an exercise in patience. I hired an independent land surveyor with no connection to the county, a transportation engineer who specialized in access easements, and a title attorney whose entire career revolved around forgotten property rights. We walked every foot of the entrance road together. The crunch of gravel beneath our boots echoed through the quiet morning while measuring equipment clicked softly and bright orange flags appeared along the edges of the roadway. None of us rushed. Every coordinate was checked twice. Every boundary marker was photographed from multiple angles. I installed temporary wildlife cameras along the fence line where the entrance crossed my ranch. Officially, they were monitoring vehicle traffic. Unofficially, they documented every delivery truck, every contractor, every moving van, and every commercial vehicle using a road that no document could legally connect to Silver Ridge Preserve. Within only 3 days, the memory cards contained hundreds of recordings. The road never stopped working. School buses rolled through before sunrise. Landscaping companies arrived after breakfast. Furniture trucks came and went all afternoon. The subdivision depended on that narrow strip of gravel and pavement far more than anyone inside seemed to realize. My attorney prepared a formal letter requesting copies of every recorded easement, transportation agreement, and access authorization claimed by the Homeowners Association. We delivered it by certified mail. Meredith responded exactly as I expected. Instead of sending original county records, she produced a polished document labeled Permanent Community Access Agreement. At first glance, it looked convincing. Heavy paper, professional formatting, official signatures. But experienced engineers learn to notice details other people overlook. The legal description referenced a subdivision name that did not exist until several years after my father passed away. The document also described pavement widths that matched the current roadway instead of the narrow ranch lane shown on the original 1989 survey. My attorney quietly smiled for the first time since we had met. We requested a forensic document review before saying another word publicly. While that process moved forward, I sent Meredith one final certified notice. The letter explained that county records identified the entrance road as property belonging to the Caldwell Ranch Trust and requested immediate negotiations regarding future access. I offered 30 days to discuss lawful solutions before exercising my ownership rights. The response arrived faster than I expected. Meredith invited several local reporters to the clubhouse entrance, held my letter high enough for every camera to capture it, and laughed as though the entire situation had become entertainment. One ranch owner cannot dictate the future of 60 families, she declared confidently. Residents applauded because they believed she was defending their homes. I watched the broadcast from my workshop without speaking. My father used to remind me that confident people reveal themselves when they think nobody can challenge them. Meredith never realized she had just done exactly that. By dismissing a lawful notice in front of cameras instead of producing legitimate access records, she confirmed something far more valuable than another argument. She believed the road belonged to her simply because she had been using it long enough. Ownership does not work that way, and very soon the difference between believing and proving was about to become impossible for anyone to ignore. 30 days passed exactly the way the notice had promised. Not one phone call arrived requesting negotiations. Not one attorney contacted my office proposing an agreement. Instead, Silver Ridge announced another weekend of model home tours, another round of promotional events, and another phase of construction planning. Meredith behaved as though my letter had never existed. That confidence disappeared the moment the forensic document examiner finished reviewing the so-called Permanent Access Agreement. His report was meticulous. The subdivision name referenced inside the document had not been legally registered until 4 years after my father died. The digital formatting matched modern software unavailable on the date printed across the first page. Even the survey reference cited measurements taken after the road had already been widened by the developer. The conclusion filled only one paragraph, but it carried enough weight to change everything. The agreement could not have been created when it claimed to have been executed. My attorney immediately forwarded copies to the county, the construction lender, and the court handling the civil dispute. Then we waited one final time. The response came before sunrise on a cool Monday morning. The lender temporarily suspended future construction funding pending verification of legal access. County transportation officials requested emergency clarification regarding roadway ownership. Meredith still refused to acknowledge any problem. She issued a community newsletter insisting that everything remained under control and describing my legal position as nothing more than harassment. By then, I had already scheduled licensed contractors to install a permanent ranch entrance exactly on the surveyed property line. Every permit had been approved. Every inspection had been completed. Every measurement matched the original 1989 survey down to the inch. Shortly after dawn, 2 steel gate posts rose from freshly poured concrete, while county deputies, surveyors, and my attorney observed the installation. The smell of curing cement mixed with damp autumn grass as hydraulic equipment quietly lifted the heavy black gate into place. Nobody shouted. Nobody argued. The entire process unfolded with the calm precision of a bridge inspection. Meredith arrived halfway through the installation, stepping out of her vehicle before it had fully stopped. She demanded that the workers leave immediately, insisting the road belonged to the community. My attorney handed her certified copies of the survey, the county parcel records, and the expiration language from the original easement. She barely glanced at them before pushing the documents back toward him. "You are making the biggest mistake of your life," she said. He answered politely. "Our client offered 30 days to discuss lawful access. That invitation remains open after today's work is complete." Around us, residents slowly gathered near the entrance. Some looked confused. Others appeared frustrated. A few quietly asked deputies what was happening. Instead of speculating, the deputies simply explained that a private property owner was exercising documented rights under court supervision while existing legal questions continued. The distinction mattered. Residents could still leave with temporary coordination while emergency services retained uninterrupted access through procedures established with the county. What changed immediately was commercial traffic. Delivery trucks stopped. Real estate tours stopped. Contractors stopped. Sales appointments disappeared almost overnight. The entrance that Meredith had treated as an unlimited community asset suddenly became exactly what county records had always described: private ranch property. By late afternoon, another black sport utility vehicle rolled into the staging area. Representatives from the construction lender stepped out carrying thick folders instead of measuring equipment. They were not interested in arguing about fences or gates. They wanted to know why millions of dollars in residential development depended on access that nobody had successfully proven belonged to the subdivision. As I watched them walk toward Meredith, I remembered the unopened bottle of wine still sitting on the shelf inside my father's workshop. She had celebrated far too early because she believed appearances mattered more than records. Now every appearance had disappeared, leaving only paper, property lines, and the simple question she had spent weeks avoiding: who actually owned the road beneath everyone's tires? By the end of that week, the story had completely changed. The television crews that once stood beside Meredith while she celebrated another successful phase of development now gathered outside the county administration building waiting for official statements. Construction financing remained suspended. New home closings stopped. County officials requested additional documentation from every company involved in approving the subdivision. Nobody seemed interested in my ranch anymore. They all wanted to know how an entire neighborhood had been built around an access road, whose ownership had never been verified. The courtroom felt strangely quiet during the final hearing. Gone were the dramatic speeches about progress and property values. This time the conversation revolved around surveys, easements, title records, engineering reports, and the forensic examination of the access agreement. My attorney presented the original 1989 survey beside the current county parcel map. The lines matched perfectly. The parcel number matched perfectly. The ownership record had never changed. When the forensic examiner explained how the supposed permanent access agreement contained references that could not have existed on the date printed across the document, even the room itself seemed to settle into silence. Meredith's legal team argued that years of public use should outweigh technical paperwork. The judge calmly replied that private property rights are not erased simply because people become accustomed to using someone else's land. Habit does not become ownership. Records do. A few days later, the county confirmed what had already become obvious. The subdivision had been developed without securing permanent legal access across the entrance parcel. The construction lender withdrew funding until lawful access could be established. Residents received detailed explanations from county officials describing the situation and outlining temporary transportation arrangements while long-term solutions were developed. I made one decision before anyone asked me to. I instructed my attorney to prepare temporary individual access licenses for every homeowner currently living inside the neighborhood. The licenses allowed families to travel across the ranch while emergency planning continued, but they did not extend to developers, commercial construction, or future expansion. Families needed stability. The people responsible for creating the problem did not deserve another opportunity to profit from it. Many homeowners thanked me. Several admitted they had never known the history of the land beneath their neighborhood. Others apologized for believing television interviews instead of asking questions themselves. Together, they organized their own legal action against the developer and demanded the resignation of the entire homeowners association board. Meredith disappeared from public meetings soon afterward. The elegant confidence that once filled every interview had been replaced by complete silence. Months later, the county approved construction of a new public access road using land acquired through negotiated agreements completely separate from Caldwell Ranch. Once that route opened, I removed the temporary licenses exactly as promised. The black steel gate remained where it belonged, protecting the original entrance to my family's property instead of blocking innocent neighbors. The last thing I restored was my father's ranch gate. Workers carefully removed it from the clubhouse wall and returned it to me without another word. We stripped away every layer of glossy white paint until the original cedar grains slowly emerged beneath the surface. Then the carved letters appeared again, one careful stroke at a time. Caldwell Ranch. I mounted it exactly where my father had left it decades earlier beside the entrance road he had protected long before anyone imagined a subdivision would stand beyond the eastern ridge. Some evenings I still park near that gate and listen to the wind moving through the same oak trees that watched 4 generations of my family grow up on this land. The neighborhood beyond the hill is quieter now. Life moved forward for everyone, just not in the way Meredith expected. My father wrote only one sentence inside that hidden letter, but it turned out to be the truest lesson he ever left me. Whoever owns the road owns the future. Justice never arrived with shouting, revenge, or anger. It arrived with patience, honest records, and one property line that refused to disappear.